Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with Democratic Whip, Congressman James Clyburn of South Carolina. Good morning to you again. Thank you for sticking with us through that break.
Well, thank you.
You had just shared that you'd spoken to President Biden months ago with Michelle Childs, a candidate we know for this potential spot on the Supreme Court. More broadly, you were the man who really exacted this promise during the campaign from President Biden. What do you think putting this kind of diversity on the court, the first black woman, does for the country?
Well, it says to every little child out there growing up under moderate circumstances, needing the entire community to help raise it, getting scholarships to go off to school because you couldn't afford to go otherwise, going to public schools because you didn't get an offer from one of the big private schools. It says to them, you've got just as much of a chance to benefit from the greatness of this country as everybody else. As you probably know, I have made it the motto of my service, making America's greatness accessible and affordable for all Americans. And that's what this will do. That's the kind of conversation I had with candidate Biden way back when he was running for president. In fact, we had those conversations when he was serving as vice president, that he came up under modest circumstances, Scranton, Pennsylvania, there in Delaware. And look, he should have as much opportunity as everybody else.
Right.
That's one of the things that draw me to him.
Well, we know the president has said he will make his pick public by the end of February. That fits right nicely with that March 1st State of the Union address. As whip, what else are you going to be able to deliver to the president to sort of announce that day? Can you revive any portion of Build Back Better, which is completely stalled at the moment?
I hope we can. It's possible. The opponents of the big package have talked about things that they can support. For instance, child tax credit. Joe Manchin has made it very clear that if we were to make it means tested, he could agree to it. So let's means test it. He's already said that he agrees with us closing the so-called coverage gap, so that those people who are eligible for Medicaid or are in states that cannot, did not expand the Medicaid, that they will have health care. So if we can do those things, let's do them.
By March 1st?
I'm not one who feels. I'm sorry?
By March 1st?
Yes, we can do that by March 1st. You could do it next week. We go back, or this week. We go back on Tuesday. What I'm talking about could be done in several days, if not several hours.
We will be watching for that. I want to ask you about something.
I didn't say it was going to be done. It can be done.
Well, we will watch you to see if it actually will be done, sir. You've repeatedly said that black women are the backbone of the Democratic Party. And you've talked about this Supreme Court nomination as the kind of things that Democrats may need. The failure to get voting rights legislation passed, the failure to agree on a police reform bill. Do you feel that Democrats need this nomination and that it will make a difference going into the midterms, given these other promises were not delivered on?
I certainly do believe that. I believed it 2 years ago. It is why I advised then candidate Biden to put that into his campaign. If you recall, the first time he ever said that was at the South Carolina debate, the 25th of February
I remember,
in 2020.
I was there.
Okay, well, I advised that. Now, a lot of people told him not to do it, but his guts told him, as he told me, when you grow up with the kind of experiences the two of us have had, but then your guts tell you some things that sometimes people didn't have those experiences that would not feel. And so he did it. And it made all the difference in the world, and it's still making a big difference.
Well, talking about those midterms and the need for a win here, I want to ask you about Jamie Harrison, the head of the Democratic Party right now. I know he worked for you for years on Capitol Hill. You're close to him. You're a mentor. He's reportedly considering leaving that job ahead of the midterm races because of disagreements with the White House. Do you think the DNC needs new leadership?
I do not. I think he is exactly what we need for this party at this particular juncture. I also know he, like all of us in this business, he has his detractors. I have mine. And it doesn't mean that he is wrong or they are wrong. It means that people have different approaches to doing things. And so Jamie Harrison is there. He will never run. He believes in fighting rather than switching.
You are being very diplomatic in your answer there. Back in November, you told the AP, Jamie Harrison knows how to do the job. I fear he may not be allowed to do the job. He's being hamstrung by people who never ran for anything. Who are those people? Who's standing in his way?
I'm not going to name those people. I think you understand
is it the
what
White
I'm
House?
saying here. No, I'm not saying who it is. I am saying that all of us, I had the same problem. Every time I run for election, talking to my grandson just yesterday, telling me what he thought I ought to do. I says, now, when is the last time you've been out asking anybody for their vote? So we do not necessarily believe in all of the consultants and the people who run things. Jamie Harrison ran a very bruising race with the gentleman you just had on here.
Yep.
He knows what it is to run. He knows what it is to lose. And I'm the same way. I lost 3 times before I got elected. So I know what it is to lose an election. And I know what it is to come back from an election. So Jamie Harrison is just what we need.
All right. Congressman, thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We'll be right back in a moment. Turning now to the tensions in Ukraine. The diplomatic back and forth continues, and NATO allies are considering sending more troops to the region. This as Moscow continues to ship weapons and equipment. Holly Williams is near Donetsk, close to the front lines.
Good morning. Here in eastern Ukraine, people do not seem to be panicking. And perhaps that's because they've been living with Russian aggression for years. But they are making preparations for a possible Russian invasion.
More Russian fighter jets arrived in Belarus this week on Ukraine's northern border. Moscow says for military exercises next month. That's when President Biden believes there's a distinct possibility Russia could invade. The Secretary of Defense warned of unconventional tactics like staged incidents that Russia could use as a pretext to move in.
Now, this is straight out of the Russian playbook, and they're not fooling us.
With tensions reaching a crescendo, Russia's President Vladimir Putin laid a wreath for the fallen during the Second World War. Russia still maintains it has no plans to invade its neighbour. But that doesn't explain the roughly 100,000 Russian troops massed on Ukraine's border. While Russian military drills on land and at sea have set off alarm bells, experts say they've previously been a prelude to an incursion.
And Mr. Putin can do the right thing as well. There's no reason that this situation has to devolve into conflict. He can choose to de-escalate.
There are 8,500 American troops on heightened alert. NATO says it's sending more fighter jets and ships to reinforce Eastern Europe. And plane loads of US military equipment have been arriving in Kyiv, including Javelin anti-tank missiles.
Ukraine's government is not ruling out an escalation, but continues to urge calm. The country's president, Volodymyr Zelensky, accused other world leaders of sowing panic late last week and putting Ukraine's economy at risk. Margaret.
Holly Williams, thank you. We're now joined by Oksana Markarova, Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. Good morning to you, Ambassador. Thank you for being here.
Good morning. Good morning.
The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley, says he hasn't seen a military buildup like this since the Cold War. Artillery, ballistic missiles, ground air forces. He said the impact would be horrific if Russia uses these. But President Zelensky stood up and said Russia may simply be applying psychological pressure. Why is your president downplaying the risk?
We are not downplaying the risk. We actually see the situation the same way, and we see the build-up, and we also know what Russia is capable of, because they have attacked us already. Since 2014, for 8 years, we are at war, and we are defending our country. At the same time, in order to defend our country, we cannot afford to panic. We have to get ready, all of us, not only our military, our very capable military and veterans, but also all civilians. So we know and we see what's going on. This is the reality with which we live for 8 years. This is the reality, this recent escalation since April. So we monitor it, we assess it, we share the information with our friends and allies. We are very grateful for the United States for very strong relations and strong response this time.
But your president said Ukraine's grateful for support, but I can't be like other politicians who are grateful to the United States just for being the United States. What does he mean by that? Because it sounds a lot like there's some friction here.
There is no friction. I mean, look, we can have some discussions and we can have difference of opinions, but United States is our strategic partner, and I would even say strategic friend, number one. Our relations, especially during the last year, has been at the highest level ever, I would say, in 30 years.
But the White House says, they issued a statement, at the same time President Zelensky is downplaying the risk of invasion. He's asking for hundreds of millions of dollars in weapons to defend against one. We think it's important to be open and candid about that threat.
We are open and candid, and we are discussing it with our partners here. Again, we just cannot afford to panic. So we are preparing for any options. And again, as I said, we know what Russians are capable of. But let's be very clear here. We know who aggressor is. Everyone knows who aggressor is. It's Russia. With the United States especially, and with other partners and allies, we may have difference of opinions on when to introduce sanctions. We may have difference of opinions on some issues, but those are friendly, open, and candid discussions.
You do,
and we really value this.
I want to understand what you need now. What are you asking the White House for?
It's the same we have been asking for 8 years, but especially this year. You know, strong 3 levels of deterrence: political, economic, and military, defensive. So strong political messages, and we're very glad that this year U.S. is actually taking active role in negotiations.
But in terms of what you're asking U.S. taxpayers for, the chairman of your parliament wrote a letter to 8 senators, including one of them on this program, asking for air defense, anti-ship, anti-armor capabilities, flexible loans, financing mechanisms. Is this a formal request from your government? Is what the White House giving you not sufficient?
Well, if you look at the statement by our presidents when they met in the White House, you will see a number of these issues in the joint statement. You will also see it in the framework agreement that we signed. So we are merely discussing what we already agreed with the United States, and we're discussing how to implement it.
To be very clear, you are asking Congress and you're asking the White House to put sanctions on Russia right now, not to wait for an invasion. Is that right? We
ask both. Russia is there. Russia illegally occupied Crimea. Russia illegally occupies, together with their controlled people, parts of Donetsk and Lugansk territories, and they didn't change the behavior during the 8 years. So yes, we believe the basis for sanctions is there.
You told me before you think a cyber attack will precede any military action. What exactly are you preparing for? Because the U.S. is warning this could have global impact.
Well, in addition to military attacks, we experience it since 2014, and especially now. Russia engages in cyber attacks, or all kinds of hybrid war. Cyber, disinformation, all kinds of information campaigns. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, a number of Ukrainian ministries have been attacked and defaced. The attack has been wider than that, and our security sources, together with our partners from the U.S., are looking at that particular attack, but it's one of many. We are under constant attack, especially in the cyberspace, and we're trying everything possible and doing everything possible to strengthen our capabilities there as well.
You're saying the war has already started?
In 2014, when Crimea has been attacked, and when Crimea has been illegally occupied or annexed, as Russia says, that has been the war, the start of the war.
So if Vladimir Putin does launch a further attack on Ukraine, do you believe he will stop there?
Well, the reason why Putin attacked us is not because he wants Ukraine, or only Ukraine. The reason he attacked us is because we have chosen to be a democracy and we have the Euro-Atlantic and European aspirations. So it's an attack on democracy, and I believe nobody is safe if Ukraine will be attacked. We do not want to be part of the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire or the Russian Federation. We want to be sovereign, we are sovereign, and we are fighting for our independence. And if Ukraine will be further attacked by Russia, of course they will not stop after Ukraine. So that's why it's in the interest of Europe and all democratic world to help us to defend ourselves, but also to show that the international rule of law still works.
All right. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, and thank you to all your viewers and all American people for support.
We'll be back in a moment. We go now to Victoria Nuland, the State Department Undersecretary for Political Affairs. Good morning to you, Ambassador.
Good morning, Margaret. Good to be with you.
We heard from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs this week that Russia has given itself the capability, if it wanted, for a full invasion, not just an incursion. What is the U.S. assessment at this point? Has Vladimir Putin made a decision on what to do next?
Margaret, we don't believe he's yet made a decision, but as he has done in the past, he's given himself every option, including, as the chairman said, a massive potential invasion of all of Ukraine, including cyber attacks, including incursion from Belarus, where he is moving up to 30,000 troops there as well. So we have to be prepared for all options.
So there is no sign yet of any kind of de-escalation?
On the contrary, he's moved more forces since we've been encouraging him to de-escalate. That said, Margaret, as you know, we did send our diplomatic proposal to Russia, as did NATO this week. We've heard some signs that the Russians are interested in engaging on that proposal, including the fact that Secretary Blinken and Foreign Minister Lavrov will likely speak this week. So again, here's where we are. We want to settle these issues through diplomacy, through arms control. Putin's given himself that option, but he's also given himself the option of a major invasion, so we have to be ready for that too.
How significant is the risk that Russia may deploy tactical nuclear weapons to the border? Is there any indication of that type of buildup?
We have not seen nuclear weapons move. There have been some loose talk from folks in Russia. But as you know, Russia already has tactical nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad and elsewhere that can range Europe.
You know, exactly. I think that's an important point to make to show the potential of this kind of conflict. Can you sort of put in perspective what the strategy is here? Because President Biden has said he's not sending combat troops to Ukraine. He's talking about moving potentially a small number of troops into allied countries in the region. Is this about containing the threat from becoming a regional war?
Well, first of all, Margaret, with regard to the diplomatic proposal, you know, Putin put forward and publicly all of the things that he's interested in. Our response and NATO's response agrees to engage him on many of these things that you've talked about. We have said, let's talk about the medium and short range missiles, the threat you feel from us, the threat we feel from you. Let's talk about how we can de-escalate with regard to exercises, with regard to military deployments. Let's have that conversation on a reciprocal basis. But we also have to prepare, as I said. So what we've been doing is first given Ukraine the kinds of defensive lethal equipment that they need in order to be able to make this, if Russia makes that big mistake and moves in, a very bloody fight and slow Moscow's roll. So defensive lethal equipment like anti-tank, like anti-air, all of these kinds of things. We have also worked with our European allies on a massive package of economic sanctions so that if he does move on Ukraine, he will feel it acutely, as will the Russian people, in terms of their economy. Yeah. It will have a crushing blow on them. And we are also preparing within NATO territory, because obviously we have a sacred and sovereign responsibility to protect our NATO allies. And with the kind of forces that he's moving, they are coming also closer to the borders of our Baltic allies, Poland, Romania, Hungary. So we have to be ready.
Understood. Ukraine's President Zelensky said Friday that his country is aware of these risks, but they don't want panic. Do you feel that is what the White House is doing here? Have you resolved this kind of friction with the Ukrainians? You don't want to have divide with an ally here.
Panic is not a policy. As one of my bosses once said, what we need to do is prudent planning. And that's what we are doing. That's what our NATO allies are doing. That's what we are encouraging Ukraine to do as well. So, you know, given that Putin has made these moves before, even as we encourage diplomacy, we have to be ready for the worst.
Well, it appears that the Senate is also nearing a bipartisan agreement on a package of sanctions, some of which would hit Russia now, some post-invasion. The administration has wanted to wait and hold on to sanctions as leverage. Will the president veto this bill? I mean, what would the impact be?
We are working intensively with the Congress on this piece of legislation. We expect will be very well aligned with what we are also building with our NATO allies and partners. I would say that one of the strengths of U.S. policy vis-a-vis Ukraine going back some 30 years, but particularly in this instance, has been that we've had a really strong bipartisan approach to supporting Ukraine. We've had members of Congress out there regularly over the last couple of weeks. But with regard to this package of sanctions, you know, deterrence is best when there's a little bit of strategic ambiguity around exactly what we are going to do. So we've said financial measures, we've said export controls, we've said new sanctions on Russian elites. But if we put them on the table now, then Russia will be able to start mitigating, and that doesn't make any sense to us.
Ambassador Nuland, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.